Okay, so I like to share recap session with like first is from my understanding and the second is as a takeaway keynotes. So on January 28, we have two sessions and then module 2, governance and management. So the first session is about leading a think tank, focused on challenges and key functions, presented by Ms. Lisa Bomasi. If I pronounce wrong, please forgive me. And she's a deputy director of Carnegie Europe. And the second session is about undertaking research management and the module 3. So it's about the independence and relevance by Chuka Onyakwana, the executive director of CSEA. So the first session by Lisa is, so first she discussed about how leadership is important in a way that they value, and when they create their values, it need to be careful how they put in act and how they do it. And so leading think tank is not an easy task because they have pressure from above and bottom. So that's she mentioned in a first point. And the second, we talk about and we discuss like back and forth, and we talk about policy impacts and how public funds are managed and in different contexts of funding resources and demands. And then we discuss about how we accountable to who, what, and whose purpose and influence. And the highlighted point is about the pillar of think tank leadership. So it's really eye-catching one. So VCR, it's short form, meaning vision, competence, and research. In details, V is for vision, and such as priorities, mission, and strategy. And C for competence and key operational functions, such as project admins, like administrative works, and communications, like finance, and R for research, which is value proposition. And those are, like, in my opinion, those are interconnected operational key functions to create their own values and to deliver what they passion. And the next eye-catching point is in the presentation is the precondition for success, what leader needs. Again, the vision and networking is very crucial. And those are the qualities and skills which are not easy to establish in a day. So it's very like eye-catching point for me. And not only the leaders, but it is highlighted that what a team needs, because we are working together with a team, you know. So the team needs trust, respect, accountability, humility, and integrity from their leaders. Vice versa, a leader needs also relevance, uniqueness, centrality, autonomy, and visibility. So, and then finally, we discuss management tools called expectation exchange. This is what I really like about, because it gives us to evaluate ourselves among our team and colleagues, what we expected from each other and what we do and what we don't. So we have like, you know, sometimes we have misunderstand about what we are doing with the team. So it's like, it's really good time, you know, to talk with each other and, like, you know, openness about how we feel, like, you know, the way we are doing things for the in the working environment. And that this time, because this is COVID pandemic crisis, right? So we feel like very like remote communication, because when we had a hard time or during this pandemic crisis, we like Lisa quotes the one I really like about, because it's like her quote is about, if people are frustrated and they didn't focus on work, but only on their frustration. So that's what I really like about, you know, to mention everything with my colleagues. And the second session by Mr. Chukwaka Onyekwana, the Executive Director of CSEA. So he talks about policy relevant research and the module 3 and highlights about how think tank research is different. One, undertaking the research management in a specific way. The research needs relevant, rigorous, and robust. So I take notes with 3R, so it's easy to catch. And share the key questions for the research agenda, such as which issues are key and which issues are aligned with our like the organization agenda, and knowing the resource we have. Later that we have several interesting questions and answer about how the policy process are prioritized, and the thematic focuses to a scoping study. So it's quite long discussion and very rich information from his organization experience as well. So finally, related to policy research relevancy, there is to learn that it can be differentiated supply and demand sides, but we need to know how to navigate them to be relevant and timely. Again, we discuss about funding related issues for being independence or dependence issue, which affects that think tank can be influenced by the funding landscapes. In this case, based on the funding sources, it can promote the independence or dependence in nature. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, May. Thank you for your very thorough recap of yesterday. And now we've had with us listening to in this part Simon Maxwell, who I'm very happy to welcome to the School for Think Tankers for the 4th time. Simon is also a long-standing friend on think tanks, and he has had a long career in development policy research and practice. He worked all over the world for more than 10 years in Kenya, India, and Bolivia for UNDP and the British Aid Programme. He was a fellow of the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex from in the 80s and 90s, and he was then director of the Overseas Development Institute, ODI, in London from 1997 to 2009. Since then, he's had a variety of jobs, including specialist advisor to the International Development Select Committee of the House of Commons in the UK Parliament, executive chair of the Climate and Knowledge Development Network, and chair of the European Think Tanks Group. Simon has extensive experience on think tanks and NGO boards and has written extensively on think tank management. He is the past president of the Development Studies Association of the UK and Ireland, and he has also a really good website where he currently publishes a lot of interesting posts that I follow. So Simon, over to you, and thank you and welcome again to your 4th School for Think Tankers.
But I completely love doing these sessions with the young think tank leaders because I always learn so much. And the best part of any research is that you steal other people's ideas. So, I'm sorry, but I'm going to steal all your good ideas today. And we're going to spend just under an hour and a half together looking at this issue of linking research and policy, of which about a third will be in working groups. So then you can write down all the ideas I'm going to steal. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. So let me just think how I do that. I share screen and I find that. There we are. And we share that. And we have to go somehow to that view, do we? There. Policy relevant research and influence is a great topic. And it's one lots of us, including all of you, have worked on because you're interested not in being pure academics, but in actually using research for policy. And, and we have lots of experience, but every now and again, things come along which completely upset your theory and throw it out of the window. And because you've had sessions before on the theory, I want to focus today on our little friend here on the left, which is, of course, the COVID-19 virus, because that virus is an illustration of a problem we've had many times before. I think of the financial crisis in 2008-9, for example, where you wake up one morning thinking everything's going to be normal, and by lunchtime you realize it isn't. And so we have to adjust our models and be very adaptive. So we're going to start, I think, by thinking together for 5 minutes about what this COVID crisis means. And I would like you to undertake just a 2 or 3 minute task for me, which is to fill in the blanks on this screen and to do it in the chat box. So COVID is a something crisis, or COVID is a crisis of something. So of course, the easy one is COVID is a health crisis, or COVID is a crisis of health systems. But what else is it a crisis of? So think for a second and then write down, not sentences, but just the 1 or 2 words that could go into that slide to tell us what kind of crisis COVID is. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can see what you're writing in the chat box. But everybody, please write 1 or 2 words in the chat box to tell us what sort of crisis COVID is. Very good, excellent words. Okay, I'm going to go back into sharing my screen in just a second. And I hope we can share the chat, Andrea, at some point so that we can record all these. I haven't got all your words in front of me, but here are some that I wrote down, which are very similar. Yours, in a way, many of them are better. But it is, of course, it's a health crisis. But it's also all these other things. It's an economic and a fiscal crisis, massive deficits, dramatic drop in GDP. It's a social crisis. It exacerbates inequality. It's a youth crisis because the young are most affected, certainly in developed countries, by the loss of jobs. It's an education crisis because schools are closed. It's a mental health crisis because people are locked up. And it's a security crisis and a policing crisis because people are breaking the lockdown. Of course, it's a development crisis and a foreign policy crisis and a globalization crisis and many other things that you added in your list. It's a moral crisis as well, and a crisis of solidarity. And the person on the right here is my idea of what a prime minister must look like as they look at all these words you've used and the ones I've got. And your in tray is absolutely overflowing. This is not something you can simply delegate to your Secretary of State. It's for health. It's something that cuts across every single part of government. And of course, it's true, women prime ministers and leaders are said to have done better than male ones, you know, as usual, of course, but New Zealand is often cited, and Finland and some other places which have women leaders. But even so, you know, I think Jacinda Ardern, who is a young woman with young children, by the time the crisis is over, she will probably look like this. So that's the problem that we have to deal with. This is a dramatic and rapidly developing and fast changing crisis with dimensions which touch on every single aspect of society and politics and economics. And of course, any sensible leader, the first thing they do is, what do? They ring the think tank. And they say, what am I going to do? Help. Look at all this. I need the advice of think tanks. So that's the question we're going to explore in this session. And we're going to do it using a case study that I don't know whether you've seen, it's been on the website, I think, but is one in a series that I've been doing with Enrique and Andrea over the last few years, which I call the Pizza Night. The Pizza Night questions. And here it is. And let's just look at what the case study is that we're going to work on. It's about a think tank director called Cecilia. It's just, have you all seen this or not? Or should I just summarize it? You haven't seen it, some of you, okay. It was pizza night and the family had gathered in the kitchen. But in one corner of the main bedroom, a light still burned. Of course, Cecilia's in lockdown. She can't go to the office. She hasn't got a proper place to work in her house. She's sitting in the bedroom and that's where her desk is. And she wanted to go down to her family. She'd hardly seen the children all week. And if she had one more Zoom call, even if it was with on Think Tank, she'd probably have a nervous breakdown. But, you know, there was a global pandemic kicking off. And as director of the think tank, she needed to show leadership. The phone had been ringing off the hook all week. Never mind the deluge of emails and the inevitable Zoom calls. Ministers, special advisors, civil servants, NGOs, business people, all with the same question: what are we going to do? I often say about think tanks, by the way, that the key question is, what are we going to do on Monday morning? And this question is, what are we going to do this afternoon? Cecilia thought it would be easier to answer that question if the think tank had had a dedicated and pre-existing department devoted to the topic. What do we do about a global pandemic if ever one should occur in the future? But I can bet my life that none of you in your think tanks has a department which is called, what do we do about a global pandemic if ever one should occur in the future? Certainly none of the think tanks I know did. So what it have and what you have and what we have instead is a whole range of researchers. Everyone's working on different topics. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got contracts. Everybody's trying to raise money. Some of them are linked to those questions and those words you put on the chart just now, but in the chat, but some of them aren't. And, you know, everybody's busy. And to make things more difficult, everybody's working at home because of lockdown. So Celia thinks to herself, you know, the obvious thing is to say to all these people who are ringing up and sending emails, sorry, no idea, ask somebody else. But that is the one thing you can't do. This is a national and a global emergency. And anyway, if you're not visible when the trumpet sounds and the battle starts, then you might as well not exist at all. So you have to step up. And Cecilia, who's the think tank leader, is to make sure that the think tank is both relevant and timely. The last thing all these people want to hear is, oh yes, we could do some work on this. Please give us a grant and come back in 6 months. Because actually what the think tank, what the world needs is advice from the think tank now. So Cecilia thinks to herself, what I need is a short-term action plan of things the team can do. And this is not, I'm not looking here and she's not looking for, you know, roll out vaccinations or bring in the lockdown earlier. She's thinking about how do I manage and lead my think tank in order to be useful to the world. So that's quite an ask. And Cecilia pulls off a page from her pad and she writes a heading, responding to the pandemic, a short-term action plan of things my team can do. And she needs to fill that in, but it's too late and she's fed up and she thinks of the pizza and she thinks, shall I have a margherita or a quattro stagioni? It's time to go downstairs. She stands up, she stretches, she switches off the light and she goes downstairs. So of course, your job, our job today is to write, to fill this in, responding to the pandemic, a short-term action plan of things my team can do. And we'll come back to that in a second. Before I do that, just to say a few things about how I think about this problem of linking research and policy and being useful to the world. Of course, there's a literature and there's a great deal of material. You've been looking at some of it already on this course. I really like the ODI toolkit, the guide to policy engagement and influence. It's on the web, it's full of hyperlinks. The link is at the bottom of the slide there, and it takes you through a whole lot of different topics. And some of the people on this list, where the work started at ODI, I think have already defected to on think tanks. So what's the approach? You diagnose the problem, you think about the stakeholders, you understand why it persists, you pinpoint the root causes, you develop a strategy, including your influencing objectives, a theory of change, communication strategy, you look at your capacity and resources, and then you develop a monitoring and learning plan so that as you're implementing the strategy, you see how you're doing and you carry on improving as you work. Great, very good if you've got 6 months. Very good if you have lots of money and you can deploy your researchers and think systematically about these things. But look out of the window and you can see the ambulances going past and you can hear the sirens. Switch on the television and the hospitals are overcrowded and people are dying in the corridor. So have you got time to do all this, and what can you do instead? Of course, the Roma model is only one. As they always say on these things, other models are available. And this is one from IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, which is very similar, but focuses on this issue of policy. Well, I spent a lot of my life thinking about all this and working on it, and I summarize the main messages in a slightly different way. And you may have seen me talking about this on a video which Andrea made, I think, last year. But everybody who works in a think tank needs to have these 4 core competencies. So all of you need to be able to do these 4 things, play these 4 roles. It doesn't matter whether you're an economist, an anthropologist, a political scientist, whether you work on urban issues or rural issues or global trade issues. If you're not in a university, but you're in a think tank, these are the 4 personalities, the 4 personas you need to have in order to change the world. The first is you need to be a great storyteller. And the woman on the right of the picture here talking to the Sultan with her sister sitting at her feet is Scheherazade from the Tales of the Arabian Nights. And you probably know the story, but the Sultan had been betrayed by a woman. He was marrying a different woman every night, cutting her head off in the morning. And there weren't many women left in the kingdom. But Scheherazade, whose father was the Sultan, said, "Don't worry, Dad, I can solve this problem." And her father said, "No, Scheherazade, please no." But she said, "Yes, I can solve this problem." And she told the Sultan a wonderful story every night. And he was absolutely on the edge of his seat, as you can see in that picture. But when dawn came, the story had never finished. So he couldn't cut her head off. He had to keep her till the next night so that he could hear the rest of the story. And she managed that trick many times, and they lived happily together for many years and had many children, and they all lived happily ever after. As people who work in think tanks, you need to think all the time about telling a simple, understandable, convincing and exciting story that policymakers will understand. I have said this on the record, which I probably shouldn't, but when I was director of ODI, I spent a lot of time editing briefing papers and taking out the last 2 paragraphs. And the last 2 paragraphs always said 2 things. First of all, oh, this issue is really complicated and we can't generalize. So really, we don't really know what the answer is, but we've done lots of very interesting research. And the last paragraph said, but you know what, we need to do even more research before we can say anything interesting. And that, to me, as somebody who worked a lot with politicians, was completely hopeless. You know, the politician doesn't want, especially when there's a global crisis, doesn't want you to say, well, these are all very difficult and I can't really tell you and I need to do more research. So we have to force ourselves as think tank people to tell a good story. Second role model, top right, is Paul Revere, who famously raised the militia against the British in 1775, I think, in Boston, just before the Boston Tea Party during the American War of Independence. And the interesting thing about Paul Revere was he knew everybody. He was a pewter smith. He made sort of plates and things and dishes in Boston. He was a silversmith. He was on all the local committees. He rode out to the villages. Everybody knew him. And they heard him say, the British are coming, quick, pick up your musket or your pike and follow me. And they all followed him. On the same night, somebody else went out to the villages called William Dawes. He didn't know anybody. And when people heard him shouting in the street, they just turned over in bed and went back to sleep. You need a network. You need to know whose telephone number will get you through to the right people. Who are the ministerial special advisors? They need to be ringing you and not your competitor down the street. And of course, networks don't just happen, they have to be built. You have to make sure you invest in connecting with people, in having breakfast with the special advisors or the ministers, in going to the meetings, in being visible, in being the go-to person on the topic. The third model, bottom left, is the engineer. That is Isambard Kingdom Brunel with his top hat and his cigar in front of the huge metal chains. He was an engineer, a rail engineer, a bridge builder, a ship builder, steamship, really practical, innovator, theoretical, but also practical. And that's us. We have to use theory, but use it constructively and make sure that we deliver to the people who are making things and changing things. In the political science literature, we often talk about working with the street level bureaucrats, the people who are actually delivering programs on the ground. And finally, bottom right, we have to think like politicians and be political. And this is Rasputin, who was the advisor to Catherine the Great of Russia, the Machiavelli of his time. Look at him, look at his eyes. Look at his eyes, his fierce eyes, his narrow eyes. He's thinking about the politics. He's trying to make sure that he can make the things happen. And he's thinking about the political process he's involved in. So those are the 4 role models. Hold those in your head always. I used to give everybody who joined my staff at ODI a copy of this page to keep under their pillow in bed, hoping that the ideas would percolate through the pillow into their heads during the night. And I also gave them this one, because of all the things we're doing in development, and the coronavirus pandemic is a very good example, you can't just think about national borders. You have to think about what is happening outside. And that means also working with others and learning from them. There are 3 ways in which we might work as international think tanks. The first is Microsoft. It's global, it's hegemonic. Every time you open your computer, you have the same package, you use Microsoft Word. It's really good, but in the end, you know, it's Microsoft. It's not from your think tank. Every time you ask Microsoft what the answer is to the pandemic, you get one answer, and it's not yours necessarily. The second model is McDonald's, very interesting company. It's a franchise operation. Some of the shops are owned by McDonald's, but some of them are owned by local business people. They're not branch offices, they're actually independent businesses, but they're using the McDonald's brand. Kind of, that's an interesting one because it allows some scope for local initiative, but you know, every time you go through the front door, you get the same policy message about the pandemic, and the recipe comes from McDonald's in the United States. And as a third model, and this is the one we found most useful, it's the Airline Alliance. And the Airline Alliance, of course, is a group of airlines. They're all independent, they're flying around the world, but they're somehow or other linked up, sometimes for marketing purposes, but also because they can share some infrastructure and share ideas. And if you fly on an airline you've never heard of, it doesn't matter, because you know, in this case, the One Star Alliance is linked to Lufthansa, and that gives you some kind of guarantee of quality. Now, airlines use a model they call code sharing, which is you buy a ticket from Canberra to Copenhagen, you get on the plane, you change planes 3 times on the way, but you know, eventually with one ticket, you arrive in Copenhagen, and if you're really lucky, your luggage arrives on the same day, because all the systems are connected. Well, in the work we've done, we've talked about policy code sharing, linking up think tanks to work together, sharing ideas, trying to multiply our impact by having an alliance of think tanks. And that's what we did with the European Think Tanks group, think tanks in 5 countries. And we would go and see the commissioners in Brussels, or we would get Bill Gates to come and speak in the European Parliament, and there would be greater leverage because we had 5 think tanks engaging in that process, making that request. So that goes under your pillow as well. Print it out, put it under your pillow, wake up in the morning, you'll be amazed. It's all gone in and stayed inside your brains. So to summarize all that, I think there are 5 key questions that think tanks need to ask. And we can apply some of that thinking also to the work that we're doing around the virus. Ask who is making what decision, when are they making it, what products do you need to influence the decision, and when do you need them? Who's making what decision, when are they making it, what products do you need to influence the decision, and when do you need them? Don't say, for example, that I'll be 6 months. Don't come the day before the summit meeting and say, I've got an idea for the summit communique, because that's been written 3 or 4 months beforehand and already translated into 6 languages. Think about the politics and the process and the people. And then, most important for us and for today's discussion, what products do we need to influence the decision? Right, I'm going to go back now to the case study. I need to find out what time it is. Sorry, I just need to check my thing. Yeah, we're going to stop talking in a second, and I'm going to go back to the case study. There it is again. And in the next slide, I've taken out all the nonsense about pizza and the children and being in the bedroom and so on and so forth. But the key thing is there is a demand. That's the first paragraph. There's a strong demand for advice from the think tank. But you don't have any products immediately available because you've been busy doing other things and everybody's working on different topics. And, you know, this is a very big cross-cutting issue, as we saw from the work you did in the chat box. And everybody has to kind of turn their minds to it in some way. And you cannot say, you absolutely cannot say, sorry, no idea. You're going to have to think about the short-term action plan of things the team can do. So that's the task we're going to take on. And let me just see what the next slide is. We're going to put you in working groups. We might stop for 5 minutes to see whether there's any feedback on what I've said before we go into working groups. I'll have to go out of sharing my slide. And I'm just going to let in Rajgana Kannanathan, who seems to be waiting. And I'm going to ask each group, which will be 4 or 5 of you in each group, to produce just one slide. We don't want a PhD. You know, we don't want something with lots of footnotes. We don't want something available in 6 months. We want something in 25 minutes or so, which answers this question: responding to the pandemic, a short-term action plan of things my team can do. So I hope that's clear for everybody. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to Zoom, and I'm going to go open the chat box. And Andrea, just remind me, if people want to comment or ask things, do they use the chat box or do they speak?
We've been doing whichever, so whatever we have time to do right now. We can probably take, if you want, 1 or 2 via voice and the rest via chat, as you prefer.
Okay, whatever you like, but don't let's get into details of the task just now. Let's talk about the basic issue about whether or not a crisis upends everything that you think you know about linking research and policy, and whether we have a model which can help us. So any thoughts, anybody? Not having any thoughts is also okay.
If you want, before, just raise your hand or just unmute yourself, because you'll be the first to speak.
Okay, you're either, there are 3 or 4 possibilities. You're either bored to tears and you've gone to sleep, you're thinking about your next cup of coffee, or you think it's so much rubbish it's not worth saying anything. Okay, we've got 2 participants who've raised their hands. How do we see them? Let me think. I'll go to there. So Marcel, you're first.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Simon. I just wanted to say that was very succinct, very much to the point, and I think it reflects kind of the kind of a, I don't want to say customer orientation, but it's really important. I think what we don't do enough of is think about the recipient of our work and what they actually need and the constraints within which they work, be it time-wise in the sense of they need it now, but they also might only have 20 minutes, half an hour to read what you're producing. So I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind, that who are we producing for? Right. So thank you. That was very good.
Very good. You know, we had a new minister once who was going on his first trip to Rwanda. And there are some very good novels about Rwanda, and the Congo, and I thought it might be interesting for him to look at them. So as a gift, I sent him a couple of novels about Rwanda, which I thought he could read on the plane. You know. And I got a message back to say, thank you very much for the books. I will get my research assistant to read them and write a summary. You know, and which taught me a lesson about the attention span of some ministers. Very good. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it Mama or just Ma? Ekuruchi.
Ma.
Yeah.
Ma. Yeah, great presentation, Simon. So I just have a few points with regards to things that we can, think tankers can immediately do in light of the pandemic. And the first is to explain what is going on to the policymakers, right? So
just hang on, Ma, because I think you're answering the question which is going to be on the PowerPoint. So
okay.
Hold your best ideas for your working group.
Okay. Sorry, I thought that was what we're doing. Sorry.
We're going to come to that.
I jumped the gun. Okay, all right.
Okay, I think nobody else has their hand up, so I think we will go into the working groups. Andrea, help me with this and remind me what we do. We have 30 people or so I think 6 working groups. Okay, and we will meet again then, and let's say at 5 past the hour, which gives you 25 minutes to do one slide. I think that's not too demanding. Even think tank people should be able to do one slide in 25 minutes. So I will come wandering around the rooms and see how you're getting on. If anybody gets stuck, then what you do is you come back to the main room where Christina is available with a cup of coffee and a biscuit for anybody who. But otherwise, I'll see you all at 5 past the hour. Very good. So now you go to your groups. Thank you very much. Well done, everybody. If we were in the room in Geneva, what I would say to you is, please walk around the room and look at all the flip charts that would be on the walls and the windows in Geneva. So I think what we'll do now for the next 5 minutes or so is quickly do that. So go back into Google Docs, and I hope what you'll see there is a slide each for each of the 6 groups. So have a look at that. And then the last slide is mine, which I haven't yet filled in, but I will as we begin to chat. So take 4 or 5 minutes, if that's okay. Go and have a look at each of the slides and perhaps jot down any points you want to discuss or bring up. And then I'll try to manage with you a bit of a conversation for the last 20 minutes or so. So do that, starting now. Off you go. Okay, very good. The technology, this is complicated. I'm now going to make my Zoom smaller so I can see the slides. You did a great job there. There's lots of really interesting ideas and lots of ways in which we can develop things. I'm not going to ask you each to present because we've only got 18 minutes and I'm told we have to stop precisely at 28 minutes past. But just to zip through quickly, so I will just say a few things first. I thought there were some very interesting things here about internal housekeeping, which I'm going to come back to all of these at the end, about building your connections outside and thinking about scenarios and thinking about timelines. So good work there. I thought there was some good stuff here about doing the kind of the mapping of who you need to talk to. and about opening lines of communication to people, including not just policymakers, but actual people. You know, that was very useful. I think some important points here about the toolbox and what can be done quickly, and about the workflow, which is also really important, and the multidisciplinary task force I want to come back to as well. So that was good. I think there is some important stuff here about dissemination and, you know, working into periodic assessments, for example, and linking back to past experience, including things like Ebola. That's very good. And there were some nice ideas here too. I thought the 2-page policy forecast, very nice idea. And I'm going to come back also to this idea of being in the world, the idea of using, you know, being volunteers for things, and the translation. And finally, group 6, I think many similar points, but also remembering to think outside the box and looking for blind spots and working with donors. Let me try and summarize that as I've done on this slide as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points. 10-point program, very good. And I'll say a couple of things about these. This is on slide 9 if you haven't got it. Do I need to share the slide? I don't think so, do I? I think, let me just ask. Can everybody see slide 9, Christina? Yes, okay. First of all, I thought you had some very interesting points about housekeeping, which the institutions that I'm involved with have had real struggles with during the pandemic. Nobody goes to the office. How do you make sure the servers are working? How do you provide support for people at home? Both ODI and IDS, for example, send a weekly email to staff, and the last paragraph is always about mental health. And they're organizing yoga classes and mindfulness and Pilates and who knows what. I think we will all be more fit than ever at the end of this. So thank you for raising that point. Who's going to manage this internally is something several of the groups raised. You know, is this a task force? The COVID-19 task force in the institution, which cuts across the whole institute, all the existing areas of work and the different programs, probably chaired by a senior person, either director or somebody like that, meeting every week, dealing with the housekeeping as well, actually, and security in the building, and lots of international think tanks. Everybody's in the wrong place, everybody's traveling, lots of problems with travel restrictions and so on. So somebody definitely chairing an internal task force, both program and admin. Nobody's actually been working on COVID particularly, but it's amazing how much you can find if you start turning over the stones and think about all those different areas that we talked about. So there might be somebody who's doing something completely different on social exclusion, you know, or on the moral responsibility of one country to another, or on something that isn't about health at all, or economics or fiscal policy. So know what you've got, and everybody think about what they can bring. And as one of the groups said, reach out, assess our own toolbox internally and externally, make sure that we have access to the best information possible. Once you've got all those things that have come out from under the stone, package it right. Think about your products. Is it, somebody said, a two-pager every now and again? Is it a weekly newsletter? Is it a series of briefing papers? Has the website got a COVID front page somewhere so that you can go somewhere on your website and find everything you've done that is related to all these different areas of the COVID response? Are you making sure that your social media team have a COVID hashtag and your think tank hashtag and are putting stuff out to social media? Package up your stuff. Don't hide your laurels under a bushel, as we say in English. Make sure that you have all your resources available. Think about how to deliver what you've got. Of course, the web page is one way, social media is another, briefing papers, email, newsletters, and briefings and so on. but can you use your convening power to organize meetings, both privately and publicly? If you haven't been asked to a meeting with the minister or his advisors, ask for one. Have all this little package of stuff you've got in a folder, take it to people, take it to business, take it to NGOs, join the meetings. I'm currently sitting in a meeting which Jamie Drummond is convening. There are 150 people on it, all the best campaigners in the US and Europe and in Africa, discussing what to do about the various crises associated with COVID. I don't say anything, I just sit there, but there are other people from think tanks feeding in. So meetings, public and private, op-eds, and all the stuff that you need to deliver it. People aren't going to know you've done the work unless you tell them. So that's also convening and holding public meetings, Zoom webinars on ways of getting out your messages. There's some really difficult, important conversations to have with donors. They need to know you're doing this. You need to be negotiating your timelines, delaying projects if you can't deliver them on time, making sure they understand all the domestic constraints that you have in terms of people having to not come to the office and work at home and all the difficulties with that, and the diversion of resources to immediate emergencies. So be as open and constructive as you can with your donors. And of course, also talk to them about changes in funding and future funding. So yes, new work, some of you said, very important, of course, the immediate response, but also thinking ahead. Lots of work on the response to the COVID crisis, but also on recovery and green recovery and what it might look like over a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year forecast period. What are you going to stop doing as a result of COVID? Are there some projects which you just think, actually, you know what, this can wait. This is not the most urgent thing. We should put it on the back burner. And then finally, a nice point one of you made in the group about living in the community and not just thinking of yourselves as kind of, think tank specialists. We can sit in our ivory tower and not talk to anybody, perhaps find ways to volunteer, perhaps find ways to link up with people in the community. So I think these are great points. You've done a very nice job, a 10-point program that comes out of our discussion. And we have 10 minutes for you to add things to my slide that you think I've missed from your slides, to disagree with things, or to comment. So the floor is open, and please, I'm just going to see whether I can make the Zoom screen a bit bigger without losing the slide. There we are. Please put up your hand if you would like to speak, or just raise your hand and maybe Christina can help to identify people. Do you think this is a big, tough, difficult challenge? Some really serious problems for all the think tanks about their way of working, their financial viability, their work program, and their impact. So this is not a joke, really. This is not a theoretical exercise. But I think you've made a really good contribution here. What would you like to take away from my list? What would you like to add? We now have 9 minutes. So that gives room for, say, 9 people to say something for less than 1 minute each. Very good. Donia first, and then Eduardo.
Thank you. Hi. So I'm Donia, I'm from Tunisia, and I'd like to talk about the delicate point of when you mentioned troll what you have, okay? Just to give you an example, we have this think tank that the OTT team knows in Tunisia. It's called l'ITES, l'Institut Tunisien. Anyway, it's des études stratégiques. So it's linked, it's an old think tank or whatever branch linked to the presidency in the beginning. And it used to do great work. The credibility was kind of dwindling down for the past period. And what they did is actually they came up around the end of October or November 2020, so recently, with their strategy for 2021 for the economy and the business. But it was really kind of reheated stuff. And, so what happened is that there was a general laugh at what they produced. You see what I mean? So I think it's very delicate to say, look what you've done already and see how it can fit. We need to be strategic. I think it's cautious to say, I'd rather not put something out there than look, like reheating some stuff I have. Just saying.
Well, obviously, you're not going to produce something that's completely irrelevant. So if you can't make it relevant to the current crisis, better to not to say it. I completely agree with you. But often, these people who work in think tanks are super bright. So they should be able to kind of think about the implication of their research. And maybe as director of the think tank, your job is to challenge them, actually. And of course, as directors, you have to sometimes say, actually, this is the wrong answer. Let's hold that a minute and go to see what other people have to say. Eduardo.
Yes, thank you. Eduardo from Mexico. I think I will add, for example, think about scenarios after COVID. What will change in your organization? Yes, not only thinking about now the crisis, but what this crisis mean for our think tank after this. What will we need to be thinking on?
Yeah, give us an example, Eduardo.
For example, I work in fisheries and natural resources. What this crisis means for the way we think about management and what new programs we will need to put in place, thinking about the situation that COVID just showed us to us. So don't get stuck in the right now, but about 2 years from now, what is could be different. Just thinking about the policy issues or even the way the organization works.
I think that's both an internal and an external problem, actually, because
yeah, both.
Like everybody in the UK is talking about the big shift to working at home. So actually you need all that office space, and how are you going to manage team building, and how are you going to bring in new people if nobody's going to the office? So there's those kinds of internal issues, and then externally, everybody's talking about building back better, the great reset, which fingers crossed we can manage. So thank you. Yes, Carlos.
Thank you, Simon. I have this question, and I think I posed it yesterday, and once again with you today. And it's in my country. I live in Colombia. I have the perception that the role of think tanks and the influence of think tanks in policymaking during COVID times have been very, very, very limited, extremely limited. And I would say that mainly what we have seen is that the government, let's say, took a special, let's say, power, big power, like everywhere. And the kind of decision making changed in a very important way. So the way policy making is developing the country change and becomes much more, let's say, centralized in the government. Even the Congress lost for a long time because it was closed for a long time also and not operating properly. So the point I want to highlight is we have a huge shift in the policy-making decision process, and let's say the usual way it is. Second, what we've seen, I think we have seen is that the government set up its own teams for, let's say, its own teams directly in direct relation with the ministers, etc., in order to let's say respond immediately to the questions they are having. So I guess my question is, what is the kind of strategy that let's say think tanks can do in this kind of situation? Because I think that some of these changes will remain for a long time. So what would you let's say recommend us in this issue?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, if you had one very good idea for policy in Bogota, what would you do in this new policy making environment?
Well, I would say that it would one of the things that I think is that you should get, let's say, almost every day in contact with decision making, and let's say even try to not work from the think tank, but even almost inside the task force that the government has arranged. That is mainly built on basis of key opinion leaders and experts, and not on research centers, universities, or think tanks, but on people, let's say, that immediately get answers, and that's it.
Yeah, I think, you put your finger on something very interesting. I mean, in principle, the model of Paul Revere from my slide that is under your pillow is about knowing these people and having their telephone numbers on your mobile and their email addresses and being able to get stuff to them that way. So in principle, you've built your network before the pandemic, and this is the point at which it becomes really useful, because you've got something you absolutely need the minister to know. And of course, you have other ways of getting messages across. I live in the UK, where first of all, there is a huge network of government committees, especially on the health side. There are vaccination committees, and there are health committees, and there are pandemic committees, which are full of university people and researchers. So you have access there. Because it was all contested, there's also an alternative committee structure of other academics. And a lot of these people have op-eds in the paper, which actually have a lot of reach, or are constantly being interviewed on television about things, mostly disagreeing with what the government is doing. So, I think you have to look at your dissemination tools and get them out. But it is right that you say that the decision-making structure and process has changed. And partly that's because, go back to that picture of the Prime Minister, it's incredibly urgent, incredibly difficult. So listen, I'm going to stop, because otherwise Andrea will probably shoot me. I've really enjoyed this. As usual, when you get a group of young think tank leaders together, they have the answers. And I think you've worked through a really practical, important case study in which we have a standard model of how we do bridging research and policy and linking research, which is very powerful, but we have to update it and accelerate it in the context of a crisis. And, this crisis eventually will end, but it won't be the last crisis. So we have, I think, some thinking to do, and some of these lessons actually turn out to be useful for everybody. Enrique, did you want to ask something, or are you telling me to stop?
I have one last question.
Yeah.
What is the role of the executive director in organizing or producing the response, a quick, rapid response from an organization that is probably more used to taking things slowly, thinking about things a bit more, etc.?
Well, I wrote on my piece of paper, simultaneous loose tight, which is a way in which companies often operate. The director has to make sure things happen. So I think the director has to create the task force and lead it and meet, every morning at 9 o'clock or at 8:30 or something, and make sure that things are happening quickly. That's the tight bit. And sometimes the director will be the mouthpiece, but it depends a bit on the size of the think tank. You also want to give space to your individual researchers to become and to be the experts in their field, the go-to people in their field. So I never took the view when I was a think tank director that I was the only person who should speak for ODI or from ODI. I wanted to make sure that we had a diversity of voices and that I was empowering people to share their specialist views. But the buck for making it happen and for pushing it starts here. Okay, listen, I need to stop because Andrea is now sending anxious emails. Let me thank you all very much for your contributions. I'm going to write some of this up, and I'll probably do a blog. So have a look at my website sometime in the middle of next week, and you should find all your great ideas reflected, and I will acknowledge the contributions you've made. Thank you all very much for joining in today, and good luck with the rest of the course.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great talk.
Thank you, Simon.
Right. So now I think that was a great session as always. And as always on the school as well. We always run out of time. It's a difficult task to balance the time that we all have and how interesting the sessions are. So we are always struggling and finding the right balance. But that's why we have the Slack channel in which all trainers are there. And you also have each other's emails, and you have Simon's very active on Twitter. So you can get in touch with all of the trainers as any methods throughout the network. As we've been saying to all of you, you're now part of the network, and you're part of us and of the extended network that we built with you here.